This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. Let's move on. I got the shoe fetish. Listen, we found our second foot guy. F. Scott Fitzgerald, foot guy 1. Yeah. Alfred Hitchcock, foot guy 2.
Foot guy
both,
2.
Both Catholics.
Interesting.
Quentin Tarantino, Catholic as well.
Ooh,
I was going to say.
Was Tarantino to raise? I mean, Tarantino sounds like a Tarantino. I'll look it up in the background.
Yeah.
Well, Abby talks about the next film, the banger, the one that most people put at the top of the pyramid of Hitchcock's masterpieces. I personally think all of these films that we're going to talk about here are all kind of at the pinnacle, but Vertigo, 1958. Abby, take it away.
So, yeah, Vertigo, I guess, is like the filmmaker's film. It's, I think I was speaking earlier about how a lot of films at that time, we really were just capturing like stories and performances on film rather than seeing them on stage. Whereas I feel like Vertigo is a film where Alfred Hitchcock has employed every single element in the filmmaking process to create a mood, this suspenseful mood. For us to feel something when we go into the cinema. And it's based on a French novel that I will try not to upset the pronunciation of.
I saw the author's name is like Narja, something like that. Yeah.
The book is called Dans chez les morts, From Among the Dead by Bolio Narcejac. And it was the film was initially intended as a mystery thriller. Hitchcock had been interested in adapting the author's work after missing the chance to adapt another one of their pieces. And he got on board some screenwriters, Alec Koppel and Samuel L. Taylor, to adapt it into the complex psychological drama that it would become. He shot it during his most prolific period, and the film was like quite personal and important to him. Yet for whatever reason, there was a very cold audience reaction, and it almost failed at the box office, which he took very hard. Yeah. And his feelings were like drastically hurt to the point where he took the cine film itself from the studio and he hid it in his safe under the assumption that it wouldn't ever get a rebirth. Although I think it was willed to his daughter Patricia, and apparently one of the things he blamed the criticism on was James Stewart's age. Because James Stewart was playing the romantic lead. I'm not entirely sure how old he was at the time, but Hitchcock blamed the fact that James Stewart was too old to be a romantic lead. And
he'd been 50. He would have been 50 years old. Yeah,
yeah, he was definitely a lot older than Kim Novak at the time. And so that kind of ended like a long and successful collaborative relationship between them. But I don't know that was necessarily what the critics themselves panned. A lot of the criticisms were aimed at the narrative pacing of the film. And I would imagine probably also at the plot of the film just being completely bonkers. So what happens in Vertigo is a former detective named Scotty Ferguson, is played by James Stewart, is suffering acrophobia and vertigo following the death of a colleague who had fallen from a rooftop when they were pursuing a criminal or something like this. And so he's out of the police force now. He's no longer a detective, but at some point a college acquaintance of his asks him to follow their wife Madeline, whom they fear has been possessed by her great grandmother who committed suicide. So
yeah. That's the one turn where I remember watching it and being like, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah. So there's a lot of complex backstory as to why Madeline needs to be under constant surveillance by Scotty Ferguson. And so Scotty Ferguson is following Madeline around when he sees her jump from the Golden Gate Bridge, and he jumps into the water and rescues her. And in the process of this, takes her home. She ends up writing him a letter to say thank you, and then they go out sightseeing together and end up falling in love. And in the process of them falling in love, she says that she's been having these reoccurring nightmares of a place that he's helping her remember where this is, and it turns out to be her great grandmother Carlotta, the one who's apparently possessing her. Her childhood home, which is known as the Mission San Juan Bautista. And so they go there to try to calm her fears, show her that it's a real place. It's not a nightmarish place. And she runs up the bell tower and jumps, committing suicide. And of course, because Scotty Ferguson suffers from acrophobia and vertigo, he doesn't follow her up this steeple to where she jumps to the bell tower. And the suicide lands him in an inquisition where the police said he should have done more to help her. And then he ends up in a psych ward for a year or 2 years or something like this. And when he gets out, he sees a woman that just looks just like Madeline, named Judy, and he pursues her and obsessively sets about turning her into Madeline. And then what was quite different about this film is that 2/3 of the way through the film, Hitchcock reveals to the audience in a flashback that Gavin Elster, the husband, had actually killed the real Madeline and hired Judy to pretend to go mad and commit suicide, relying on the fact that Scotty would not follow her up the bell tower because he's got agoraphobia and vertigo, and in the process of that, switching the body of the real Madeline for Judy and throwing Madeline off onto the roof. And so there were some reservations at the twist being revealed at the time that it was revealed. But Hitchcock exerted that the film was a suspense movie and not a mystery. And so therefore the audience should know more than what the characters know, so that they would be tearing up their nerves and having feelings of helplessness at like, but that's not the case. That's not what's happening. You don't know. It is her, rah rah, like this. That you would feel nervous knowing what you know, that the characters might never discover this. And so it wasn't until the restoration of the film, so after Hitchcock had died and it came out of the safe, that it became hailed as one of his greatest achievements and considered his magnum opus. And it rose to the top of a lot of greatest films of all time. It dethroned Citizen Kane as number one on a Sight and Sound poll in 2012. And people were more receptive and more it celebrated more its exploration of themes like obsession and identity, and again the male gaze. I guess because we became audiences that were more interested in the psyche of characters rather than just seeing a mysterious plot play out on film. But aside from the what were you going to say, Kim?
No, go on. Finish. Yeah, finish it. But I have, yeah.
Oh, well, I was going to say, aside from that, I think people appreciated more the art of the film itself. So, uh, the the devices that Hitchcock deployed to sort of support the feeling of suspense and obsession were extremely detailed, and as we know, he's a very detail oriented guy. So color was a very big thing that he explored in the making of Vertigo. And so yeah, color was first introduced into cinema in 1935. But its use wasn't really that widespread. And so he was one of the first directors that started to use color in dialogue with the stories that he was telling. And the way he did that through Vertigo was to use mainly green, but also red in contrast to it. So when we meet the character of Madeline, she's in a green dress and in a red room, this restaurant. And so because green and red are opposing on the color wheel, the effect is that she really stands out in this restaurant. So he notices her. Her beauty is like hard to take his eyes off. He can't get her out of his mind. The green pops up other places. She's driving a Jaguar car that is green. And apparently the interesting thing about the Jaguar is that it was through the color of the car that they were able to accurately restore the colors of the film. So the film restorers had to go to Jaguar and say, this MK8 that you made in 1957, can you give us color swatches of what color that car was? And it was through the Jaguar green that they were then able to accurately restore the rest of the colors in the film. Wow. And so the green runs through the film as a motif, because it's considered to represent things that are mysterious and sinister, which is how Scotty sees Madeline. And then later on when we see the Judy version of her, and Judy is finally dressed up as Madeline when Scott's transformed her into Madeline. She walks through this green haze in her hotel room, and that's sort of supposed to be this like mystical sort of, now she has become the kind of reincarnation of the dead Madeline, with Scotty not knowing that it actually is is the person that he did fall in love with in the first instance. But a lot of the time she's wearing this gray suit that again, Edith Head, the costume designer, Edith Head was a very big costume designer in Hollywood at the time. She worked on all the huge films. Hitchcock and Edith had decided that she was going to wear gray because it gave her an airy feel. They wanted her to be dressed in something that a sort of icy blonde wouldn't normally wear. So they went for the gray with the black scarf and the black shoes. Again, the shoes were a big attention to detail that he paid. And apparently Kim Novak had come in and said, I don't think the character would wear this. I don't like this suit. I don't know why the character would wear this suit. And Hitchcock had said to her that the visual aspect of the film was more important to him than the story, and he'd been planning on this costume for months, and she was completely shocked because she'd never had a director care about the clothes at all ever in the past.
Wow.
So yeah, the green became a big thing in the film, and it kind of wasn't appreciated until they had those color restorations done. But the film was also celebrated for its technical innovations. So they had developed this technique, which is called the dolly zoom, or now it's called the vertigo effect, or it's also called a contra zoom or a trombone zoom. And so it was invented to portray the disorientation that Scotty feels when he's going through these vertigo episodes. And the way it's achieved is you've got a zoom lens on the camera, and as you're zooming in, the camera is physically pulled back. And so what happens is whatever is in the foreground remains where it is, and the background feels like it's moving away in an odd way. And it's used in a lot of films. I personally have used the vertigo effect in a film before to create disorientation.
It's super effective when you see it.
Really effective.
It works. Yeah.
And a lot easier to do now, because apparently he'd wanted to use the technique as far back as Rebecca, but they didn't have the technology at the time. And when they did it during Vertigo, the effect cost them $19,000 for what was effectively just a few seconds of screen time.
Wow.
Crazy.
Now it's very cheap. You can do a contra zoom really easily.
I have to point out that the magic hour has ended in London. I can see it's become dark behind Abbie.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the gloaming has passed. Yeah, I just noticed. I noticed things, Abbie.
We're into the dark. No more gloam. He also used a lot of locations, which he didn't like using locations. So some of them may have been recreated. And the actual mission San Juan Bautista itself did not have a bell tower, which was something they had to build in a studio. But interestingly, so this film was made at around the time when TV was starting to become a thing. And there was a lot of anxiety in the industry that people were not. It's like now that people were not going to go to the cinema, and that they were going to stay home and watch stories on television instead. So there was a big push for cinema to become something more than just visual storytelling. And so this probably was what led to a lot of the artistic choices that he made, but also they had like a lot of wonderful set pieces in the section where Scotty and Madeline are going around on this day trip and falling in love. So they go around a churchyard, an art museum, the McKittrick Hotel, the Golden Gate Bridge, Sequoia Forest. And now, like, cinephiles will go to San Francisco and they'll do the Vertigo tour to sort of go to all of the locations in the film, and it sort of adds to this like quality of dreamy obsession that the film has. And then another big part of this film was Hitchcock's collaboration with Bernard Herrmann, who did the music and has done the music on several of the films. And to sort of like add to that tone of disorientation and obsession, his compositions were like very swirling and circular, and like all of this just adds to the themes, right? Like the swirlingness of the vertigo, the swirlingness of falling in love. Like he's like Jimmy Stewart's character is just in this constant spiral, and it's being fed by the colors, and it's being fed by the music. And I think you can kind of see why like audiences that have come in later decades could appreciate it more than perhaps people at the time could.
Yeah.
And then this visual motif was also echoed in the poster, which is an iconic poster.
Which is great.
Designed by Saul Bass, who was an artist and filmmaker himself. And he also designed the title graphics for the film, and they're considered to be one of the first like computer graphics that had ever been used for title design in a film. And there's a quote from him that was in the New York Times where he said, While he was browsing in the bargain bin of the bookstore on 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, the young graphics designer Saul Bass was struck by the spiraling images in a book about the 19th century French mathematician Jules-Antoine Lissajous. He bought the book and experimented with ways of replicating those spirals. I made a batch, sat on them for years, Bass recalled, and then Hitchcock asked me to work on Vertigo. Click. As for the legendary title sequences, Bass wanted the Lissajous spirals to be 100% accurate, which they seemed physically impossible to pull off at the time. To overcome the tech barriers they were facing, the team called in a computer pioneer called John Whitney, who rigged up a giant World War II anti-aircraft computer that was capable of rotating nonstop. And so the non-stop circles were what created the poster graphics. And
Wow.
he would then go on to do the posters for Psycho and North by Northwest.
Incredible. And you can get the original 1958 Vertigo vintage poster right now for $1,200.
Hey,
You want to get a copy of the poster, which I kind of do. I want to say something. So in the background, this is fantastic, Abby.
that was so cool. It's so interesting.
It's
One thing, just real quick, just so interesting to these effects, the spiraling thing, the contra zoom. We watch them as modern audiences, and it's neat, but you don't conceive of how difficult it was to pull some of that stuff off. Yeah, it's cool to get the backstory on that. Thank you.
Yeah, his career is such a perfect example of like technical innovation and mastery marrying storytelling perfection. You know, and trying to do like meta narrative construction, but also with like a very, I don't want to say lowbrow, but the low really meets the high with Hitchcock. I have two things to say. One, we're going to do an extra bit for the After Dark now because I just learned in the background about the color restoration that happened to Vertigo. Was not aware of this. And I think that's another really cool little bit of history that we can read about here after we're done with the core episode. The other thing is I just made the connection, and maybe I knew this subconsciously, or I in the back of my brain, I knew this, but he's obviously pointing toward Proust with Madeline.
Oh,
of course, because what sets Proust off on his vision, you know, is the Madeline. And so it's just right there, right? So in Proust's novel, the narrator famously dips a Madeline into tea, which unlocks a flood of memories. And then in Hitchcock's Vertigo, Scotty is driven by an obsession to recreate a lost past embodied in the figure of Madeline Elster. So, I mean, there you are, psychological trigger. You know, so he's operating at this very high level, but also like popular list, you know, mass media entertainment.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things about Hitchcock.
Yeah, it's crime and sex. Like,
sex and death.
Yeah, sex and death. Yeah.
These are the only two interesting things. Sex, death, and podcasts.
Yeah.
Abby, anything else you want to say about Vertigo before we move on?
No, I feel like I've said a lot about Vertigo.
Yeah.
You have said a lot about Vertigo. I really enjoyed that, though. This is such a fun... That's such a fun structure for an episode. It's nice to have you along for the ride here. So what do we have next? We have so North by Northwest, and I have, is that right? I have myself. Yeah. Okay, great. So North by Northwest. Brad, when's the last time you saw North by Northwest?
You know, it's been a little while, but that's one I've probably seen I've seen that at least 4 times, 5 times. I mean, it's a great movie. Yeah.
Yeah, another iconic shot in North by Northwest. Which shot immediately comes to mind, Brad?
Well, I think a lot of people, I have this too, is him being sort of chased down by the plane is a big one.
The plane is just such a, you know, and North by Northwest is such like a rollicking action movie. It's just an action movie. It's about this guy who, you know, he's an ad man. He's a Madison Avenue ad man who's really successful, and he's going about his day. He's got this weird relationship with his mother. I think the impression is that he's a bachelor. And I mean, yeah, he would have to be. Yeah. Like sort of the eternal bachelor is one of his topics. You know, and he ends up in this scene, you know, at the UN with a knife over his head. He pulls the knife out of somebody, but everybody thinks that he's stabbed this guy. And then he goes on a wild, escape into the middle of the country. It goes all the way from New York all the way to the Dakotas. And it's this just, kind of mystery, drama. So, and it's crazy the run of movies that we're talking about here. I mean, we're getting into like Beatles level Rubber Soul to Abbey Road territory here, where it's just like, how did they do this? What happened? They did what? So, okay, yeah. So 1959, and this was a triumph, and it's a masterpiece of mistaken identity, espionage, chases. If you're more into like if you're into like psychology and like human psychology, I would say Vertigo's the place to go, right? If you're into action adventure, like North by Northwest is the Hitchcock movie for you. If you're into horror, Psycho is the Hitchcock movie for you. If you're into suspense, maybe go to Rear Window or Rope. But like, these are all the best examples of those areas, full stop, with enough overlap that if you like Rear Window, you're probably going to like all the others. If you like North by Northwest, you're probably going to like all the others. And it's incredible that one dude, with the help of his wife, was able to accomplish this. So,
can I just say it's also wild that the triumphant return was just a year later.
Sure. So like,
right.
Yeah. You just finish Vertigo and maybe it's not a huge hit. And then you come back with this. Yeah. So the plot of North by Northwest revolves around advertising executive Roger Thornhill, played by Cary Grant, who becomes entangled in a complex web of espionage after being mistaken for a government agent named George Kaplan. This sets off a series of chases and encounters with foreign spies, spearheaded by the suave villain Philip Van Damme, played by James Mason, a great James Mason. He's such a good villain in this. Along the way, Thornhill meets Eve Kendall, Eva Marie Saint, who's just like bombshell sex, just get. And they're sleeping in different bunks on the train. And this is the one where, when it's fine, the train goes into the tunnel, let's say, and it's just like, it's so clearly
Hays
naughty.
Code.
Yeah, Hays Code, which we'll talk about more. But it's an innocent man, falsely accused, and it has one of the most iconic sequences in cinema, which is the Mount Rushmore sequence. It's got that great set piece at the end. They end up like on a chase on Mount Rushmore, and it doesn't look believable, but it doesn't matter. You're just like, this is incredible. This is awesome. Yeah. So let's talk about the crop duster scene. So North by Northwest is filled with memorable moments, but none more so than the crop duster scene. When Thornhill's sent to meet the fictitious George Kaplan at a remote bus stop in Indiana, and it's so high contrast too. You're in Manhattan, you're at the UN. There's that great shot overhead of the UN where he's like running. He's just this little soul man. It's reminiscent of the cuckoo clock scene in The Third Man, right? And it's a very post-war moment, like the one man inside this bigger thing. And then, not much later in the film, he's in this like empty field in Indiana.
Middle of nowhere. Yeah.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
The sequence has wide open spaces, sense of vulnerability. It's like maybe the most iconic chase scene in cinema. It's just so cool. I've got something about it from the Hitchcock on Hitchcock book. Let me grab it. I love North by Northwest. It's got a great score. Was it Herman who did the score, Abby? It must have been.
I will check. Probably.
Yeah, check in the background. Yeah. Okay, so let me see here. Here we are. And this is On Style in interview with Cinema Magazine. Oh, here's how the interview starts. What is cinema? That's Hitchcock. What is this magazine? The interviewer is like, cinema is distributed nationally in the United States, a magazine for what we think of as the intelligent motion picture goer. Our premise, Hitchcock, are there intelligent picture goers? Okay, and then it goes on a little bit, but then it gets into Hitchcock. Now, to give you an example, where I do a lot of my own production design, in fact, I do most of it today, would be a sequence like the airplane chasing Cary Grant in North by Northwest. You remember that sequence. See, there you go. Droll, right? Well, has very careful design because I designed it purely to avoid the cliche. Now, in movies or in films, if we want to call them by a more dignified name, or motion pictures to go a little further, the cliche of the man being put on the spot is usually a place of assignation, and it takes the form of a figure under a street lamp at the corner of the street with the rain-washed cobbles shining in the night. Maybe a cut to a blind being pulled aside and a face looking out. A cut to a shot of it. A shot of it. Every time I use the word cut, I mean a shot, a separate piece of film. And another piece of film that would be a cut would be a black cat slinking along the wall. Anyway, this is the cliche atmosphere in which you put a man who has been deliberately placed in danger. Somebody is going to come along and bump him off. In the gangster films, they went by a black limousine that went da 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 with a gun and the guy fell down. Well, of course, this is such a cliche thing you see that one has to fight shy of it and run as far away from it as one possibly can because it's all predictable. The audience has seen it so many times. Students of the cinema are so familiar with it. Now I decide to do something quite different, and I say to myself, what shall I do? Well, let's have it with nothing so that the audience will have no conception as to how this man is going to be bumped off or shot. So therefore, I take the loneliest, emptiest spot I can so there is no place to run for cover, no place to hide, and no place for the enemy to hide, if we can call him that, you see. Now we get him off the bus as we stand him, a little tiny figure, establishing very clearly the complete wasteland everywhere. Would this be an establishing shot? It could be. It does two functions. It sets up the man being placed in position, and it sets up the nature of the surroundings so that the mind of the audience says, well, this is a strange place to put a man. Now we go down and we go close on him, and this is where design comes in. And he looks around him and cars go by. So now we start a train of thoughts in the audience. He's going to be shot at from a car. And even deliberately with tongue in cheek, I let a black limousine go by and I let it go right by. You see, now the car. We've dispensed with the menace of possible cars or automobiles, we'll say. Now a jalopy comes from another direction, stops across the roadway, deposits a man. The jalopy turns and goes back. Now he's left alone with the man. This is the second phase of the design. Is this going to be the man? Well, they stand looking at each other across the roadway. Grant, our hero, decides to investigate and casually walks across and talks to the man. And obviously nothing is going to emerge from this man, or you feel that until his bus begins to appear. Now the local bus comes, and just as it pulls up, and this is a matter of timing, just before it gets to the stop, the man says to Grant, "That's funny." And Grant says, "What's funny?" He says, "There's a plane, a crop dusting plane over there, dusting a place where there are no crops." Before this can be gone into in any way at all, he's on the bus and gone. So now you've got the third phase. The audience says, the airplane. Now, what's going to be strange about the airplane? And you soon know. And from that point on, you have a man trying to find cover. There is no cover until he gets into the cornfield. Now you do in the design a very important thing. You smoke him out with the very instrument that you were using, a crop duster. Theory being, don't have a crop duster without your using it. Otherwise, you could have any airplane. So the dusting of the crop, the dust rather from the crop duster, smokes him out of the cornfield, and he dashes in front of the truck desperately, and the plane makes a last dive, mistimes it. Or the truck does come to a stop by his frantic waving, and out goes the whole lot. So you see, this is the design. The sequence is very carefully designed, step by step, both visually and to some extent in its menace, the menace of its content. So that's production design, exemplified in terms of its function. Okay. Just I like having Hitch's voice in here, and you can sort of see how it gets set up and how great it is. It's a great
crop duster.
Yeah, there you go. Chekhov's crop duster. If you have a crop duster, it's got to dust crops at some point, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking about that scene and about how how clearly it's ripped off from, or how clearly like Seven rips off from that. You put him at the very end, you put him out in the middle of nowhere, and you have to go. It's totally surprising. Nobody had ever seen anything like the ending of Seven. But it's very similar shots up high, and they're out in the middle of nowhere and a road and da-da-da and all of that.
Yeah.
So we're really talking about the language of cinema and the language of film and storytelling. And if you don't know North by Northwest, finish this episode, listen to the After Dark, and then go watch it because it's a must watch. It confirmed Cary Grant as one of Hollywood's greatest leading men. The script, written by Ernest Lehman, was praised. Everything about this movie's great. And yes, Bernard Herrmann did the score. The score is great. I mean, it's just pure Americana given to us by a Catholic Englishman.
From Leytonstone.
From Leytonstone. That's right. Yeah, from the East End. From, the child of a Cockney greengrocer is giving us the pure Americana. Just, it is. It really is. I mean, even with the business at Mount Rushmore.
No, I mean, even the weird paranoia of it and the mistaken identity of it. I don't know if that's Americana necessarily, but it certainly feels like modern, right? Like you could just get tangled up in this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And the business at the UN, and it's a very post-war film. And what is he? He's an ad man. He's his business is kind of deception and bullshit. He's a sales guy. And North by Northwest was very well received. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards: screenplay, film editing, art direction, set direction. It didn't win, but I mean, it sort of had everything. It's like a blockbuster, a hit, critically acclaimed, getting Oscar nominations. It had it all, and it's quintessential Hitchcock. If you only watch 3 Hitchcock films, I would say you got to watch North by Northwest, probably North by Northwest, Psycho, and Vertigo, probably something like that. It's tough. He's like you got to have 5 because then you got to get in, Rear Window and
the box set is a big one.
yeah. It's a big box set. All right, so we're gonna hand it over to Abby again to take us into Psycho. All right, so okay, again, dude, and it's like a year later. Yeah, and Brad's like,
it's a year later, and oddly, after doing these big Technicolor films, he decided to scale it down. Do a black and white film, had a smaller budget apparently, and used a television crew to make it. And despite all of these limitations, it became one of his most iconic films and one of filmmaking's most iconic films, I think, and was groundbreaking in horror and suspense cinema. It's a horror film that a lot of modern day horrors will reference and point to. And it was adapted by the Robert Bloch novel of the same name. Yes.
I think it's also called Psycho.
Yeah, also called Psycho, loosely based on a real life murderer named Ed Gein. And so, yeah, Psycho revolves around Norman Bates, who's a shy motel proprietor. And
it's my turn, Abby. It's Ed Gein.
Ed Gein. Okay.
Yeah. Our local boy back here in Wisconsin. Okay. Yeah. When they produce a serial killer, the Keg of America produces some real fucked up serial killers. And Ed
That's
Gein
true.
Is,
we just need a French person to come and
announce
all the French titles that keep turning up in this episode. And then we've got it covered. So the novel itself was unnerving, but Hitchcock saw the potential to make something even more unsettling on screen, and the resulting film introduced audiences to a new level of psychological horror and pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable in mainstream cinema, which apparently we will talk more about later when we discuss the Hays Code. So again, like Vertigo, it was subverting traditional storytelling, where introduced to Marion Crane, who was portrayed by Janet Leigh, and then she's murdered halfway through the film. so our protagonist
and the audience had nothing like that had ever been seen, and it's still wicked subversive.
You still do not kill off your protagonist halfway through the film and make somebody else the protagonist, or at least you don't make the antagonist the protagonist. So there are a lot of things about like the the formula of Hitchcock films that really wouldn't fit into like a modern day like save the cat type of like thing that we now sort of like follow to the letter in modern day cinema.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're led to believe that it's her journey, but she gets killed, and the unpredictability combined with the dark voyeuristic themes of the film became a blueprint for future horror films, particularly ones in the slasher genre like Halloween or Scream. And it was probably one of the first films to employ some of the other tropes that we see in horror quite frequently today. So when we're introduced to Marion, she's an unmarried woman in a hotel room with a man. They clearly have just been in flagrante.
Yeah, the train had gone through the tunnel.
The train had definitely gone through the tunnel.
I recall some very specific lingerie in this.
There's lingerie. And she's getting dressed as the film starts.
And they're not married. It's scandalous. Yeah.
And he's not only not married, he's divorced. So she's wanting to further this relationship and get married, and he's given her the excuses about having to pay alimony, and he's got debts other places, and he was living above a shop. He was
That's right.
He's living above a shop in a different town.
That's really funny. That's so funny. We just watched in real time Abbie Lucas understand Art of Darkness and why we do this show. Abbie finally gets it.
Yeah.
Go on.
He's living above a shop in a different town. He's only seen her on occasion in these hotel rooms that you have to pay for by the hour. And I believe she was paying for the hotel room.
Oh, boy.
So yes, she's an unmarried woman engaging in sex, and then she goes on to steal money from her boss. She goes back to work. This extremely arrogant client comes into, I think they're like a real estate agency or something. He's flirting with her, going on about how he's buying his daughter her first home because she's getting married. So obviously this is bubbling up a lot of feelings for Marion. She steals the money and goes to find this man, Sam, that she wants to marry because she's got the money. She's going to solve this debt problem. And obviously, because she's a horrendous slut and a criminal, she deserves to die.
Yes.
So, it's in horror, like we still do it today. It's the woman that behaves badly who's gonna get stabbed or whatever.
But she's very sympathetic, though, isn't she?
Oh, she's definitely sympathetic, because again, like the women in his films are like very like fully realized. They're not one-dimensional at all. Like we understand why she's stealing the money, and where this is backed up, like as we were saying earlier, by the conversations that she can hear in her head as she's driving along. I mean, she's also very aware of her transgressions. She falls asleep in a car. Policeman starts following her. She has to buy a new car to change license plates.
Well,
and all of this.
And that's so interesting. I'm thinking about this. Like, she's pursued by men the entire film, and she imagines at one point in her head the car salesman talking to the sheriff or the sheriff's deputy, and the car salesman says, "I think that's the first time the customer high pressured the salesman," or something like that. He may be, but that's such an interesting echo of like Hitchcock's flip, where he has the women pursuing the men. So interesting.
Yeah. And so she hasn't quite made it to the town that this lover of hers lives in, so she has to go off the highway and stop by at Bates Motel, where she encounters Norman Bates, who's extremely mild-mannered, looks like he wouldn't hurt a fly, like quite a sweet boy. He shows her into her room, like invites her to have sandwiches later because it's too late for her to drive to the nearest diner, and it's raining and all of this sort of thing. And so she goes to get ready for dinner and is very careful about taking the 40 grand in cash and hiding it surreptitiously in a copy of the LA Times or whatever. All the while he's spying on her through a hole, because he's put her in the room next door to the office, and we're sort of like, oh, okay, maybe he's just a pervert. You hear him have this argument with his mother up the hill at the house that they're at, where the mother's like, oh, we're not, who is this woman? She's not coming up here. You're not bringing women back, all this sort of thing. And so they end up eating in the office, and then I think it's immediately after that she gets murdered. She goes and she goes into the shower, and in a scene that is known by everybody, she gets murdered. The scene itself apparently consisted over 70 camera setups. It took a full week to film. It only lasts 3 minutes. But it was a lot of like rapid, quick close-ups. Of course, they had to get like the horror of the stabbing, because she stabbed multiple times, without showing anything. We couldn't see her body.
Sure. Is there like one frame or one cut where the knife pierces the skin? I think.
Oh, I don't know about that. I
mean,
it sounds like something that probably would have happened, but
no. Keep going. Yeah. I'll look into it in the background. Yeah.
Yeah, we had to. The lighting was very strategic. We see the silhouette of the killer that looks female, so we assume it's the mother. And then it's the fast editing of it is combined with Bernard Herrmann's again iconic screeching string score that that we now associate with anybody getting stabbed.
Right.
I will. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, God, knives are terrifying. And knives, and everybody everywhere except maybe in the UK, because I don't know. Oi, mate, you got a license for that knife?
Yeah.
everybody has a knife. Everybody. You know, and like a knife can kill you just as quickly as a gun.
Oh, yeah, like a knife to the right organ, that's a horrible death.
It's a horrible death, yeah. And but no, and I looked it up. I was mistaken. That the knife never actually pierces the skin.
Okay.
So you get this simulacra of a stabbing. And again, again, in the metaphor of film language, it's just cut after cut after cut after cut, and that's what he's doing. And that's what you're seeing.
Lots of different cuts. Apparently he initially didn't want any music over the top of it, and Herrmann convinced him. And now that's like one of the biggest things that we remember about it. And apparently Hitchcock was so impressed by the result that he doubled Herrmann's salary after that. So
nice. Good for Herrmann.
Good example of the composer proving their worth. Apparently, also they use chocolate syrup for the blood because that shows up as darker on black and white film than like a lot of the Hitchcock films you watch. The blood definitely looks fake. It's a lot lighter in color.
Like stop sign red.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The blood kind of looked real because it was this chocolate syrup. And they were using these shots that were sort of like either looking at the shower head or from the point of view of the shower head, which with those big film cameras, like we were talking about earlier in Rope with the film, that would have been very difficult to get. I think they probably would have had to rig something, because I did a short film earlier this year where I wanted the shower head in the foreground, and with a modern cinema camera, which is tiny, it was difficult to get. So I can't imagine what they must have gone through to try and get that at the time with all the big film on the back of it. And the sound effect of the knife stabbing was a knife going into melons. Because Foley is a fun thing we get to do with odd stuff. So Janet Leigh, who played Marion Crane, had admitted that the scene had a lasting psychological impact on her, and she was no longer able to take showers. She had to take baths and leave the bathroom door open.
Wow.
So it's having this effect on her, obviously, as the actor in the scene, but also it's a horror that's happening in an extremely mundane moment. Like, none of us expect to die in the shower unless we're slipping and breaking our necks. So
it's also one of the most sorry, Abby, go.
I think that's what makes it extra scary, is what I was going to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it plays on that primal fear. It's when even men you're extremely vulnerable getting into the shower. There's only one exit. You know, you can't. There's no rear window in the shower. It's like I mean, and if somebody wanted to kill you and get away with it, it's easily the best place to do it. Because it's easy to clean. Yeah, it's really, really horrible. And there's something very kind of almost womb-like about a nice steamy hotel shower.
Well, and and the curtain too, this notion you can't see but it's right there. And you know, I know a lot of people, it's almost the opposite fear, but I think it comes from the same place, that are afraid you go into a bathroom with the shower curtain, afraid that there's somebody behind the curtain waiting for you if you go into the bathroom too, which I think is
going into the bath.
Like it is a weird space where I think we all feel slightly more vulnerable than anywhere else.
Yeah. So just to get callback, his mother was Catholic. But it's
all making sense.
All right. Yeah. So I had to get that in. I'm thinking about other kind of iconic, like, shower murders, and what immediately pops to mind, not so much horror, but the first two that come to mind are Scarface. There's some horrific business that happens in the bathroom in Scarface with the chainsaw, and then I'm pretty sure, and then No Country. There's that shootout, you know. So
pulls the curtain in front.
Yep. And then in another Coen Brothers film, where does she hide? She hides doesn't she get wrapped up in a shower curtain? In Fargo.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
So I mean, and just, anytime there's a shower or a shower curtain or a shower scene in a film, you're going to think of Psycho. For sure. So I've got something from Hitchcock on Hitchcock here. And this is Alfred Hitchcock with Dr. Frederick Wortham. Dr. Wortham. I didn't see Psycho, I'm sorry to say, but many people have commented on the act of violence in that movie. Was it a little stronger than you would have put in formerly, say 10 or 15 years ago? Imagine having the Stones to come into an interview with Hitchcock and go, I didn't see it. A lot of people are saying.
What?
Only a guy with the letters DR in front of his name would have the balls to do that.
Right.
Yeah,
tell me about this little film you made.
Yeah, this little film you made, Psycho. Yeah, and it's like, I like the interview. It's on the page here. It says Dr. Wortham, Mr. Hitchcock. And here's what he replied. Well, I don't know. I have always felt that you should do the minimum on screen to get the maximum audience effect. I believe the audience should work. Sometimes it is necessary to go into some element of violence, but I only do it if I have a strong reason. For example, in Psycho, there was this very violent, impressionistic murder in a bathroom, you see. And it was montaged by little pieces of film giving the impression of a knife stabbing a victim, and so on and so forth. Now, once I had completed that piece of film, I had instilled in the minds of the audience enough apprehension about the existence of a murderer so that, as the movie went on, I was able to reduce and eventually practically eliminate all further violence because I only wanted the threat left. Once I had given the audience that one, shall we say, sample, I allowed them to imagine the violence, you see. I did not have to show it. Violence for the sake of violence, I don't think has any effect. I don't even think the audience is moved by it. It's so obvious. And the interviewer, but wasn't this violence stronger than your usual dose? Hitchcock, it was. Wortham, more. Hitchcock, more. Wortham. Then am I fair in thinking that some of the atmosphere of needing and wanting violence which exists in our society at present has rubbed off on you? Is it possible? In other words, Hitchcock would not volunteer it, but the audience demands it because they are accustomed to it and do not want to settle for less. Hitchcock, I didn't do it for that purpose. Wortham, well, perhaps unconsciously. Hitchcock, well, no. Actually, I would say as far as violence goes, no. The lovemaking, yes. I felt that in the portrayal of lovemaking, the ordinary embrace and the kissing on the cheek or what have you, I feel that young people today would laugh at that. Wortham, that's right. Hitchcock, they would yawn. And I was conscious of making the lovemaking scenes a little more risque than I normally would, only because I felt that modern manners had changed to some extent. So that's funny. He's getting in this kind of tete-a-tete with this interviewer going, the violence, not so much, but the lovemaking. It's the 60s now, or like we're heading into the 60s. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. There's the constant sort of, I don't know, constant, but this sort of pearl clutching, hand wringing that directors who make stuff with violence in it get, like, don't you think that this has a pernicious effect on society, kind of thing? Always kind of cracks me up.
What about the children?
Right. But speaking of Tarantino, there's a great interview with Tarantino back around Pulp Fiction time, I think, where somebody, some pearl clutcher gives him this, and he's just like, "'Cause it's fun, Janet. That's why it's in the movie. 'Cause I like it." It's so good. Which is, people like seeing it. People like being titillated and scared and unsettled. I mean, it doesn't have to mean anything else. Yeah.
It is strange to me that we can show and do show the most horrific and graphic and gruesome scenes of violence, but like a bare breast and sexual content, like sexual behavior, like if a woman on film was to reveal her breast and then something sexual was to happen, shut it down. This is pornography, but we can show somebody getting their head cut off. Just it's very says something very strange about our psychology. But it also, I think, says something. It's not necessarily all bad. I think it's a nod to sort of the fact that we still recognize the power that exists in sexuality. We've got to kind of put it over there because it's so powerful. We all got here that way.
Right.
We're not all going to go out by having our heads chopped off, but we more or less, all of us get here through Eros.
Well, and the violent stuff, if you see it, if you think about watching it with another person, you see the violence, you can both kind of be like, well, that's horrible. That's horrible that happened in the service of the plot or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
If it's like you see like a hot woman or man and they're naked and you kind of like it, like it's hard to it's hard to be like, oh, that doesn't mean anything to me. Or like, like meanwhile you're sort of starting to blush or whatever. Yeah. It's just more awkward to watch with other people, I feel like sometimes.
Totally. I've got a few things. Right. Because that is interesting to think about. And just like simple basic functions, like half the audience springs a boner.
Right.
Like we don't need that. Like that's uncomfortable.
Right.
We don't want to know that's happening in the same room as the rest of us.
Exactly.
I think that's pretty much it. Then also, like, where are those boners going to go? Like,
right. Right.
No, it is. It's real. I mean, that's true. That's very interesting to think about. And yet again, we will watch the most graphic torture together as an audience, and nobody flinches.
Yeah, and just be like, wow,
strange,
wild. Okay.
I mean, what was it? Terrifier 3 made more money than Joker. That's where we are now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I have a few more things, and then I'll pass it back to you for a little more on Psycho here, Abby. But this is from the biography again. Hitchcock's childhood habit of watching his family, his schoolmates' life itself from the safety of the sidelines, the habit of a frightened boy who happened to have an artistic sensibility, sensitive young man, received its severest assessment in this film with its integral motif of the morality of the gaze, which is not suggested at all in the novel. And it's hard to do. How do you talk about the gaze in a novel, really? You could do it, but in Hitchcock's major films, the moment when the predator becomes the prey is often linked with the moment of gazing. In Rear Window, it is when the killer, Raymond Burr, looks back at James Stewart. That's such a cool moment in Rear Window when he realizes he's being watched. Come on, man. In Vertigo, the audience watches as Stewart twice watches and pursues Kim Novak. In Psycho, it is as the viewer moves at last through the rear window and into the screen to visually participate in what was only suspected and indirectly observed in Rear Window. It is as the killing is realized in all its full horror. The eye is, in all this, the matrix of identity and guilt. The symbolism is the logical fulfillment of the twitching eyes of the murderer in Young and Innocent, the epitome of all the images of vision in Hitchcock's films. Goes on. So the animation of the nightmare sequence in Vertigo is actualized by the grim discovery of deception shortly after. And in Psycho, the painting of corrupt gazing and perverse intentions is transformed into reality by the unleashing of a monstrous, lunatic repression. The dialectic of watching and being watched has, by the end, received its ultimate treatment in Psycho more than in any other Hitchcock film. All of this is expressed by Hitchcock's insistence on changing the killer's hobby from stuffing animals in the novel to stuffing only birds. And we're going to get to more birds here in a minute.
Yeah.
The sexual wordplay is obvious. Stuffing birds is the hobby of a sexual psychopath. And the gazing, and of course, you call it a bird, right? And the gazing eyes of stuffed crows and owls can see nothing. Owls belong to the night world, as Hitchcock pointed out. They are watchers. And this appeals to Perkins' masochism. He knows the birds and he knows that they're watching him all the time. He can see his own guilt reflected in their knowing eyes. This explains other avian imagery, the crucial shot of Perkins knocking over a sketch of a bird when, in his son personality, S-O-N, he discovers the body of Janet Leigh. The last stuffed bird is, by the way, spoiler alerts. I mean, I'm sorry if you, I hope we're not spoiling Psycho for you.
Like,
yeah, at this point, yeah.
Turns out he's a little unhinged, this guy.
Yeah, right.
The more I learn about this Norman Bates guy, he's a real jerk.
Hold the fort. Yeah, the last stuffed bird is aptly a woman named Crane, who came from Phoenix, a city named for the mythic bird. Right. And why when Perkins suggested candy, Hitchcock insisted it be candy corn, a confection that resembles the kernels pecked by chickens. As will become clear, everything about Psycho points forward to and aesthetically necessitates Hitchcock's next feature film, The Birds. So,
okay.
Any final words on Psycho before we go into The Birds, Abbie?
Yeah, there was a small controversy that happened again with Saul Bass. Saul Bass came back for Psycho to design the storyboard for the shower scene in particular. And this led to a long-standing debate between Bass and Hitchcock about who actually directed the scene. So you can go, there's a video on YouTube where there's a side-by-side of the scene with the storyboard on one side, and like you'll see that about like 3/4 of the scene are almost exactly the same as the storyboards, including the iconic circular match cuts of like the blood going down the drain, and then the twisting of the eye, which like we all as modern filmmakers are now like, oh, we need these shots that match together.
Right.
So yeah, the scene very closely follows the storyboards. However, I would say, like, as a filmmaker, you know, a lot of we were discussing this earlier, the collaboration. I mean, like Alma could probably take a lot of credit for a lot of Hitchcock's work, and like being a director, you are, what you are contributing is your vision and your taste, and people are usually working within the constraints of that and contributing to it. So whilst Saul Bass might have come up with some of the like more interesting shots in it, I think we can probably argue that Hitchcock really did direct it. But it is interesting to watch the little side-by-side storyboards. And then also, I mean, I guess the other thing that was quite groundbreaking and subversive at the time was Norman Bates himself, because we're looking at a complex individual with a dissociative disorder. And I don't know. I don't know if at the time we would really be having like quote unquote bad guy characters that had that much depth to them. And
Right.
it was interesting that like aside from being like a horror, it was also very psychological in its exploration into who this guy was and why he did the things that he did.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. So many.
Rather than like a typical monster, you know.
Right. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Very good. I've got a little bit from the biography, and then we're going to get into the birds and kind of bring us into the back half of his life here. Very cool. At the beginning of his career from 1925 through 1938, Alfred Hitchcock directed 23 feature films in England. Then right. So just a reminder to the artists out there, or whatever you do in your life creatively, you might have to direct 30 films before you direct Psycho. Okay? Okay. Then from 1939 through 1959, from age 40 to 60, came the most prolific period in his life. 24 feature films, 2 short films, and 15 television shows, an impressive list by any standard of judgment. But then from 1960 on, there was a drastic reduction in his creative output, and the tally from that year until his death in 1980 was 6 features and 5 television shows. Filmmaking is hard. Filmmaking takes a lot of energy. It's not a chill, easy thing to do. It's actually incredible. Scorsese is still making movies, for example, and making great.
And Ridley Scott is churning out one every year and a half or something like this.
Yeah, and they're ambitious too. I mean, whether you like them or not, they're ambitious. Yeah.
Absolutely. After Psycho, Hitchcock's financial fortune was forever assured, and soon a deal was struck that guaranteed him a creative home base and the freedom to work essentially without interference. Also, he remained in amazingly good physical health for most of his last 20 years, although his indulgences at the table and the bar were never curbed for long. Likewise, until the last few years, his powers of reason and concentration were unaffected by any of the factors that might have modified those powers in others. The reason for the cutback in production then must be sought elsewhere, and it was indeed something inside him that changed everything. A sad and ultimately destructive passion pursued from behind a mask of love and activated with increasing indiscretion. He never recovered from this period. It seemed forever after to have killed something in him. At the beginning of 1960, no one could have foreseen how close he was to disaster. In February, he directed with apparent diffidence an hour-long teleplay called Incident at a Corner with Vera Miles and George Peppard. Miles was once again cast as a woman who was imagined or may have, who has imagined or may have imagined an event that throws several lives into disarray. Apart from this one exercise, however, Hitchcock undertook a prolonged vacation, actually a series of weekends at Santa Cruz, where he read a new novel sent for his consideration. Winston Graham's Marnie struck him as full of possibilities for a story of sexual intrigue, an aspect of adult life Hollywood was then beginning to confront more directly. But he put this aside until he could be sure of a leading lady attractive and strong enough for the enigmatic, frigid, compulsive thief. Okay. But then in April, before leaving with Alma for Europe and Asia to attend international openings of Psycho, an item in the Santa Cruz Sentinel caught his attention and sent him back to the shelf of literary properties he had optioned, but that still laid inactive. The paper reported that in La Jolla, California, on one quiet spring evening, over 1,000 birds descended through a family's chimney, destroying most of the household goods and grotesquely injuring the housewife when many of them were caught in her hair. Hitchcock was at once reminded of Daphne du Maurier's strange short story, The Birds, published in a 1952 collection whose film option he had purchased. He reread the story, found it strong on atmosphere but weak on plot and character, and could not see a film emerging from it. Okay, yes. So you get the idea. So he's starting to get the idea of the birds in his mind here, and he's hanging out he goes to London for the premiere of Psycho, wearing a silk ribbon of the Grand Officer de la Confrère de Chevalier du Tastvin at every publicity function held. So
Nailed it.
He's a made man now. Yeah, awesome. So he's getting into the birds. I just want to make sure I get this business about about meeting and starting to work with Tippi Hedren. But in any case, where is it here? Let's get into the birds. So he makes the birds in 1963, and it's remembered as one of the most iconic and terrifying horror films ever made. Brad, when's the last time you saw the birds?
I don't know if I've ever actually seen the birds.
Oh,
what?
I can't. No. I may have watched it when I was like a boy at some point.
Good. But... Okay. Well, the birds has everything, Brad. The birds has Greek tragedy. It has all the elements of Hitchcock. You don't get Jaws without the birds. It's very Jaws is very birds coded. Abby, you're nodding. Did you watch the birds in the run up to this episode?
I watched it this morning.
Oh, nice. Okay. Why don't you? I've talked a lot, so why don't you tell us about the birds, and then I'll get into the making of it and do the rest of it. Yeah.
Okay. So, in the birds, Tippi Hedren is a daughter of a newspaper owner, and she's a bit of a she's a very sassy young woman. She goes into a pet store to buy a minor bird, and this dashing man comes in. He recognizes her from a court case that he was a lawyer for, I think, where she'd played some unnamed prank that ended up in the smashing of a glass window. And he pretends that he doesn't know her and thinks that she's the pet store owner. So they have this flirtatious little meet cute where he says he's buying some lovebirds for his sister. And then he kind of confronts her and like tells her off a little bit. And she's intrigued. So she buys the lovebirds and tracks him down. so she finds his license plate. Gets her someone at her father's newspaper to track down his house, and she tries to take these lovebirds to his house, and then his neighbor says, "Oh no, he's up the coast at what is the name of the place?" So she goes up to the coast to where he's from, and after a kind of like wild series of occurrences that would never work in modern cinema. So she goes to the general store, asks where he lives. Those people are like, oh, they live across the bay. You'd have to get a boat. She gets them to hire her a boat, and then they don't know the name of his little sister, and they're like, well, if you go and visit the woman who
the school teacher, and it's called Bodega Bay.
To visit Bodega Bay. Yeah. So she has to go visit the school teacher to find out the actual name of the sister. And then she finds it out, and she gets in this boat and she goes across the bay to deliver these lovebirds that she's bought. She's in high heels and a fur coat and can apparently operate an outboard motored boat. She goes over unseen by him, breaks into the house and leaves these lovebirds on the table.
Oh my gosh.
And then gets back in the boat to watch. And he finds them and then like basically chases her back to the other side of the bay in his car. So they're now love interests. He invites her over for dinner. The mother's a little bit cautious and a little bit obsessive over her son, the inciting incident is that a gull like attacks her while she's in the boat. So she gets attacked by this gull. She then gets invited to dinner, and then in this town, birds just start attacking everybody. Gulls, a whole bunch of sparrows come down the chimney at some point, like they do in that story, and there's just loads and loads and loads and loads of birds, and they're attacking everyone. They attack the school. They start killing people, and it's utterly terrifying.
And the birds are just this pure representation. It's as close in popular media, modern popular media, that you can get to Greek tragedy, just to this force of nature, quite literally becoming manifest based on the psychological and spiritual wanting of the protagonist. So like her pursuit of this man with these birds, like, resonates through nature in almost like a perverse inversion of like the King Arthur myth. Like the king has to die and be, or whatever it is, the king has to die and be reborn. Like for the king, it's like the cycle of nature you see represented like in a movie like The Lion King, where the king returning to his rightful place literally restores nature to order. In this film, her breaking with the natural order sends nature into just a mania.
I also saw it as like the tensions of the sort of three central adult women surrounding this man being kind of the thing that summons the birds. Because you've got Tippi Hedren's character who's like pursuing him, and she comes along. We've got the obsessive mother who's already chased off the former love interest, which was the school headmistress. And at some point, Tippi Hedren ends up staying the night at the school headmistress's home. And so there's this like ex-girlfriend, current girlfriend, obsessive mother who can't let go of her son, like triangle of weirdness.
They're almost like the witches in like the witches in Mackers, but they don't know it, right? So you're playing with all of these archetypal things. And it doesn't read this way.
Sister. Yeah.
Yes. And it doesn't read this way to maybe a contemporary audience, but like the school teacher, she's a spinster, right? She's aged out, or is
absolutely
aging.
Like I when I watched it, I didn't really consider that. I was just like, oh, this
different. It's different times.
It's different times.
But it's like, what are her romantic prospects in Bodega Bay, right? Like she's just like hung it up to dry, right? Yeah.
Well, she moved to Bodega Bay because she was interested in him. Yeah.
Right.
And this ended up staying there. And it looks like it's kind of happening again with Tippi Hedren's character. She's like, she's followed him to this bay to try to find him. And then they keep like stopping her from going home. She has to go to a party. She has to go to a dinner. Like they're now getting killed by like wild birds. She can't leave.
Yeah. It's really cool and really worth multiple watches because there's so many things going on. I'm going to read a little bit about the making of it, right? So it's based on the short story by Daphne du Maurier. The Birds was his follow-up to Psycho. He wanted to push the boundaries of horror. He enlisted screenwriter Evan Hunter to adapt the tale. He gave Hunter free rein to create a story that delved deeper into the psychology of the characters, especially the role played by Tippi Hedren, Melanie Daniels. From the beginning, the production was complicated by technical challenges. Hitchcock initially intended to use mechanical birds for the attack scenes. However, after spending over $200,000, the equivalent of more than $2 million today, on the creation of fake birds, it became clear that they looked too artificial on screen. This forced the crew to capture and use over 25,000 live birds, including gulls, ravens, crows, and sparrows, which brought a whole new set of complications to the shoot. The birds were difficult to handle, often attacking the cast and crew.
Well, yeah. I mean,
many of them carried lice, which spread among. Brad, do we have the birds ready for next week's show? You know what? We'll talk about it. Yeah, the birds and the leopard. The leopard.
Yeah.
Crows and ravens, known for their intelligence, would quickly figure out how to evade capture, making it nearly impossible to film them in large groups. To catch them, the crew resorted to extreme measures like wearing black clothes and face paint to sneak up on sleeping birds at night. Trainer Ray Burrick recalled the chaos on set, mentioning that about 12 or 13 crew members were hospitalized in one day from bites and scratches inflicted by the birds. Tippi Hedren herself was injured several times during the filming, including a nasty gash near her eye when a bird attacked her. The bird attacks became more than a plot point in the film. They became a real danger for those involved. And despite the physical hardships, it was the psychological toll on Hedren that would prove to be the most devastating. So I've got a little bit from Hitchcock on Hitchcock, and this is an interview where he's talking about film technique. I like to get as much of his voice in, and this is that interview with Cinema that we referenced earlier. And the interviewer asks, "Can we get an example, say, from the birds of this type of thing?" I think you're talking about constructing scenes, right? Yes, well, you get a different thing in the birds. In the birds, you get a sequence, the main sequence, of course. You get the girl in the attic. There is a clear montage. That's the same as the scene in Psycho with the girl in the bathtub, the attack, by the series of pieces of film assembled together of all facets of the scene. Now, the reaction of the people where the birds are attacking the house and you don't see them, there is a matter of shots assembled together to create a panic of people who are running from what? I don't know. I can't see anything. Yeah, there's a great sequence in the birds where they're trapped in the house and the birds are attacking. All you hear are like thumps, right? You're not seeing anything. You know, is that right, Abby? Yeah.
Yeah, you're not seeing anything, and there's this wild piece of sound design where there's just so many birds that the like sounds of the birds like almost becomes like a string sound, or it makes up part of the composition. But there's just so many that the screech is constant.
Yeah, and here's what he says. Now I give two kinds of shots about this scene where they're hiding in the house. I give the mother and child a dotty movement, can't find cover. They end up in a corner. The girl retreats from nothing. So her image was an emptiness in the foreground, symbolizing nothing. And she backs up against the sofa and starts to climb the wall, rolls around the lamp. I build her up as she goes along. Well, these images are angles chosen to express the fear of the unknown. They're not shot just without any thinking about what the intention is, you see. Okay, goes on. Every shot is carefully thought of. So,
of course, yeah.
We're going to talk about the obsession now with Tippi Hedren. Tippi Hedren, a model turned actress, she didn't even know she wanted to have a career. She wasn't even like pursuing this. Like she got wrapped up into it. I mean, I think she kind of half was and half wasn't. And then Hitchcock's like, no, you're going to be a leading lady. She was cast in The Birds after Hitchcock saw her in a television commercial. He signed her to a 7-year contract, an unusual move that indicated just how much faith and control he intended to have over her career. Hedren, a single mother to a young daughter, accepted the contract for financial stability, but she would soon find herself trapped in a nightmare. I saw a huge problem coming, Hedren said. There would be the invitations to have lunch with him, and then there would be lunch and a glass of wine. And then he would tell me stories about how he would like to do some research. One day we would have a little table and there would be 12 martinis on it. I would be filmed while I was drinking 12 martinis. Hitchcock's fascination with Hedren quickly turned obsessive. On set, he would recite dirty limericks to her and make lewd comments when they were alone. According to Hedren, his behavior became possessive, particularly when she interacted with male cast or crew members. Whenever she was seen laughing or talking with a man, Hitchcock would become cold and petulant in their next exchange. This behavior did not go unnoticed by the rest of the cast and crew, with co-star Suzanne Pleshette warning Hedren that Hollywood wasn't always like this. That's crazy. So he finds this model. She wants to be an actor, signs her to a 7-year contract. And I assume maybe it was exclusive or not, but I mean, like, he's like, you're going to make this commitment. Yeah, to lock her down.
Wow.
Yeah. And like, you could see how it's echoed in the movie. Like, and I'm just doing a quick little ad hoc research, and it's saying, yeah, it was an exclusive contract.
Wow.
So he basically, it's almost like indentured, like I wonder if such a thing would be legal now today. I assume you can do anything in a contract, but
those contracts were not uncommon at the time, but they were generally signed with a studio rather than like a singular filmmaker. But I guess because he was so rich and had like nothing standing in his way that he could sign people to his films in particular. But like actresses like Audrey Hepburn, for example, had like a 3-picture deal with like Universal or Paramount or whoever it was, and in that time wouldn't be able to go work for anybody else
Yeah, right. And then when Abby and I are done writing Killdozer the musical, I'm finally released from my obligation.
Is that right?
From the contract we signed in Geneva, Abby. I am, of course, kidding. We really are working
I've
on
never
Killdozer.
even been to Geneva.
Yeah, right. Wink. All right. So Hitchcock's infatuation with Hedren escalated to disturbing levels. He had her handwriting analyzed, reportedly had her followed, and even drove past her house. His fixation culminated in a terrifying incident. One night, while they were alone in his limousine, Hitchcock threw himself on top of her and attempted to kiss her. Hedren fought him off and jumped out of the car when they arrived at her hotel. The next day, she was scheduled to shoot one of the most grueling scenes of the film. So, got out of control.
Geez.
Not great. Not making any excuses for Hitchcock. Kind of not surprising when you know he's drinking this much. He's got unlimited cosmic power. He's, so yeah, we don't make any excuses for this on Art of Darkness. It just is what it is,
Yeah.
And
also, not to be like armchair diagnoser, but having been in this industry for many years, there's a lot of neurodivergence, and it you can start to look back at the past and go, oh yeah, I see why this person who was reportedly like had big mood swings and would demand like unlimited amounts of takes to get things absolutely perfect and was obsessive about detail and things like that, was not just someone who was supremely dedicated to their craft. Like there's something else going on there that you can take 100 people and like obsessively bend them to your will. And again, that's not an excuse, but I think it's quite prevalent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sure.
You can see kind of you can see a relationship. Like, is it surprising that he would be obsessive about relationships too? Not really, right? I mean, yeah. Like, what's he going to be, just like super chill?
Yeah.
Like
he's like, yeah, I've got to get all these colors and sound and things perfect, but like women,
women, she's pretty, I get it, but no biggie. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
I was watching some of the camera tests, the early camera tests she did before The Birds, where he got her to do scenes from different movies, and it was her in different costumes. Like they were testing how the costumes looked on camera, but she was with there was just this guy that was sitting on the sofa, and he's not an actor from either The Birds or I don't think Marnie either. And he was just like, you could hear Hitchcock from behind the camera just like barking little orders at her about how she needed to stand and all of these types of things. But this guy that was sitting on the sofa was saying wildly inappropriate things to her about like necrophilia and all of this sort of stuff, and she's like she's sort of being instructed to like flirt with him in the scene. Like that's the thing that they're trying to test. And it got to the point where Hitchcock himself actually was like, can we change the subject? She's like, yes, please, can we change the subject? God. Like, say something else. And it was disturbing. It was just bizarre, these camera tests.
This poor woman, like you're saying, she just pulled out of commercials and I'm like, oh, 7-year well, okay.
You're not going to say no. Like, yeah.
Right.
No. You've got a kid. I mean, who would then grow up to be an actress herself, but
yeah. Huh.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the attic scene in The Birds. I had another thought. It'll come back to me. The filming of the attic scene in The Birds was a culmination of both physical and emotional torment for Hedren. In this climactic scene, I was just going to say Hitchcock trains. Love trains.
Trains.
Yeah.
Trains.
Yeah.
So he makes an awkward pass at a woman.
Yeah.
Trains. I mean,
yeah. Trains.
The trains were really not surprising at all.
Not at all. In this climactic sequence, Melanie Daniels, the character played by Hedren, enters an attic only to be viciously attacked by birds. Hedren had been told that mechanical birds would be used for this scene, but when she arrived on set, she discovered that live birds were being used instead.
Oh, God.
A cage had been built around the attic to prevent the birds from flying away. For 5 days straight, handlers threw live birds at Hedren, who was trapped in the small set. The birds had been trained to peck at her, and having recently been captured from the wild, they needed little encouragement to attack. Hedren described the experience as brutal and ugly, and co-star Cary Grant, who visited the set, reportedly told her, "You're the bravest woman I've ever seen."
Wow.
On the 5th day of shooting, Hedren finally broke down. As birds were tied to her clothes and pecked at her face and body, one came dangerously close to her eye. Exhausted and traumatized, she screamed, "I'm done," and collapsed on the floor, sobbing. A doctor was called to the set and ordered a week of rest for Hedren, but Hitchcock initially refused to grant her the time off, claiming they had no one else to film. The doctor insisted, and Hedren spent the next week recovering from what had become a gruesome and horrifying ideal. Oof.
Yeah, Tippy, the birds, they're real, but don't worry, they're also angry and hungry. So this will be, yeah. And we've trained them to peck you. So they're trained.
Yeah.
Crazy.
You know. Yeah, professional birds. You're in good hands.
Yeah.
5 days.
Right. Wow, that's horrible.
Absolutely horrible. I mean, and this is her account, but it's also corroborated by, I mean, this is a big public, I mean, this is not public, but I mean, this is a film shoot with a lot of people. And yeah, apparently, you know, she had an emotional breakdown at the end, and that's tough. That's worse than, I think that's as bad or worse than Kubrick.
That seems worse than how Kubrick treated Shelley Duvall to me. I mean, I don't know. He didn't sick wild animals on her.
Yeah. Just Jack.
Right. Well, yeah.
Wild animals with claws and beaks and lice, apparently.
Right. Oh my God.
Gosh. And there's something about the eye too. The fact that the bird went at her eye, you just go like, oh, jeez. So the relationship deteriorated further during the filming of Marnie, 1964, the next film that they worked on together. Abby, did you watch Marnie at all for your prep? I know it wasn't one of the ones.
No, I did. I didn't watch Marnie.
Yeah, Marnie is one of those that you hear about. I don't know it that well, but it's 1964 psychological thriller directed by Hitchcock. Stars Tippi Hedren and Sean Connery. The poster is awesome. It just says Alfred Hitchcock's suspenseful sex mystery, Marnie. Like just literally just put the word sex right in the middle, big bold font. It was the last time a Hitchcock blonde would have a central role in one of the films. You know, it's considered I think it's a pretty important Hitchcock movie. It's not one of like maybe the marquee ones, but it's like one level down. Yeah, in her memoir, Hedren wrote that Hitchcock's harassment escalated into full-blown sexual assault. She claimed that Hitchcock tried to sabotage her career after she rejected him, blocking her from receiving roles with other directors while she was still under contract. Despite the professional success of The Birds, the personal toll on Hedren was profound. She remained under contract with Hitchcock for 2 more years, but her career never fully recovered from the director's obsessive control. In later interviews, she reflected on how powerless she had felt at the time, stating, "There were no laws about this kind of situation. If this had happened today, I would be a very rich woman." So, yeah, like I would have sued the shit out of this guy. Like, so here we are again. What are we going to do? Are we is Hitchcock canceled? Are we never going to watch another Hitchcock movie?
I'm gonna watch Marnie. I think
I feel bad.
I haven't seen.
But you have to be able to say, yeah, monstrous behavior, totally unacceptable, terrible way to treat a star actress that you're grooming. You know, but also like the grooming is the abuse. Like it's all abusive. Like this is not how you're not supposed to trap her in a cage. Like, isn't your whole movie about like, you're lost in the sauce, right? Like you're not taking your own medicine, something. So in any case, we're not here to judge. We don't make judgments on Art of Darkness so much, but I mean, there you go. You got to take it all. The abusive relationship between Hitchcock and Hedren became the subject of intense scrutiny over the years. It was depicted in the 2012 HBO BBC film The Girl, which portrayed the psychological torment Hitchcock inflicted on Hedren during their time working together. Hedren's daughter, actress Melanie Griffith, has also spoken out about Hitchcock's disturbing behavior, which we will talk about on the After Dark. We got to talk a little bit about Alma in relation to this, and then we're going to get into the later life and wind down.
Okay.
You know, so Alma's here through all of this, all right? And their personal relationship, you can imagine, was more complex. Hitchcock had a well-known fascination with blonde actresses. This obsession with icy blondes, like the most beautiful women alive at the time, Grace Kelly, Ingrid Bergman, and Tippi Hedren, well documented, and you can imagine it caused friction, right? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and despite that, the marriage survives, and she remained at his side, and even when the media was kind of coming at them. Apparently their attraction to one another would wane over time, right? But they stayed together, I guess is the point. And
I wonder if earlier you were saying that he had said that the sort of first thing he wanted to do was be a film director, and the second thing he wanted to do was marry Alma. I wonder if the work was perhaps more important to her as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
probably
the marriage was maybe just like a means to stay in that world.
Yeah.
Could be.
She must have had her own reasons. I mean, and I'm sure her life too would be worthy of an Art of Darkness episode. We're just going to do the Hitchcock one because that's the show, right? But I mean, very interesting figure, and clearly a very important woman in the history of cinema and women in film. And again, worthy of attention. Be an interesting way to get at the Hitchcock story would be to tell her story, and like through her eyes, what is she seeing? This husband who, because again, he's like, Hitchcock is kind of playing with dolls. He's stuffing birds in his own way and making these masterpieces, but it gets creepy.
Birds and dolls and trains.
So we're going to get into the later life, and we're going to wind down, and then we'll break for the After Dark and come back. Later life and legacy here. As Hitchcock's career continued into the 1970s, his films became darker and more introspective. And we kind of leave, like after Marnie, I think after The Birds and Marnie, we kind of leave the marquee streak for Hitchcock, right? He made Frenzy, he made The Family Plot, which was a little lighter, more comedic. And though his later films were less commercially successful than his earlier work, they showcased his continued experimentation and exploration of the human psyche. And I'm going to read now. This is actually how the Spotto Fellow starts his biography. Reporters and photographers, movie fans and autograph seekers, and guests at the Beverly Hilton Hotel clustered in the lobby all afternoon, and by 5:30 on March 7th, 1979, the desk clerks and bellmen were finding routine duties almost impossible. The hotel at the intersection of Wilshire and Santa Monica Boulevards in Beverly Hills was fully booked. And all day there was an increasingly clear feeling that an important event was about to occur and to be recorded for posterity. Throughout the afternoon, 10-foot stands supporting lights of enormous wattage were strategically placed from the front door at the hotel all the way to the entrance to the grand ballroom. Miles of thick black cables linked generators to cameras to lights to control consoles. Taping and editing machines and microphones were uncrated and tested. Technical directors supervised carpenters and electricians. Young men and women from the television studio were directing traffic indoors and out, and members of the dinner committee were making last-minute adjustments to the seating arrangement. 1,500 people were to attend the formalities that evening, and millions more, thanks to technology, were to watch a taped and edited version on television within the week. Inside the ballroom, 150 tables were set for a 4-course dinner, and a stage had been constructed with a speaker's podium and with great looming photos of film stars in a variety of dramatic situations and settings. At 6 o'clock, as if on cue, the first limousines drew up to the entrance of the hotel, and the curious onlookers, restrained by blue-coated guards and velvet ropes, strained to watch the parade of those who arrived for a $300 a plate dinner. Like footmen at a royal banquet, several youngsters in the crowd called out the names of arriving guests. This was not entirely inappropriate, since a Hollywood gala has for a long time been the closest American parallel to the appearance of crowned heads. It's James Stewart, Ingrid Bergman, Cary Grant, and Charlton Heston, Jane Wyman, Olivia de Havilland, Barbara Streisand, Michael Caine, Mel Brooks, Walter Matthau, Diana Ross, Christopher Reeve. The list comprised the venerable senior citizens of Hollywood and the newest faces of popular TV series. On that warm, dry evening, the American Film Institute was going to present its 7th Lifetime Achievement Award. Everyone awaited the arrival of the honored recipient, but as usual, he sabotaged their expectations. He had been quietly escorted to the hotel much earlier in the day and had been settled in a 7th-floor suite. The staff for the event, I'm going to read a few more. This is very cool. The staff for the event was acutely anxious, for although they had announced Alfred Hitchcock as their choice in the autumn of 1978, he had for months refused to cooperate in the press arrangements and interviews and had declined to help with the complex preparations involved in selecting film clips and sending special invitations to colleagues and actors. He had also refused to divulge his preferences about how to handle many crucial details regarding the taping. During January and February, he had his vital signs monitored professionally every other day, far more often than the once-a-week habit of the past 40 years. With a heart pacemaker in place for almost 5 years and with an undiminished appetite for undiluted alcohol, his concern for a quiet private life was understandable, and he delayed any involvement with an event that might unsettle him. He looked on the evening as his own obituary, according to David Freeman, a writer working with Hitchcock at the time, and he didn't want to attend the funeral. Although only one of the previous recipients was no longer living, there was for Hitchcock something final about a Life Achievement Award, something that marked him for the unspeakable reality of death, a reality he had tried to dispel as if by sympathetic magic in all his films. He did not want to allude, even by a celebration of his career, to his no longer remote decline. He was 79 years old and 150 pounds overweight, Freeman said. He was at the end and he knew it, but he didn't want others to know it. Finally, days before the dinner, he reluctantly agreed to see representatives of the press and to answer questions from the Institute staff. On the morning of March 7th, Alma Reville Hitchcock, his wife and most frequent collaborator for 53 years, read in the LA Times that she was not expected to attend because, after several strokes, she was partly paralyzed and bedridden. Small and frail, she had always appeared even tinier when placed next to her husband's outsized girth, and her illnesses had indeed sapped her energy. But as she had for decades, she made a remarkable stubbornness serve her physically, and on the spot, she decided to go. By afternoon, the nurse at home had helped her to bathe and dress, and she was ready to depart long before a car was sent to their home, which was only a 5-minute ride from the hotel. Her husband had preceded her hours earlier, for everyone connected with the event agreed that he should read his acceptance speech for videotape cameras in the afternoon. The chance to edit, correct, and rearrange the remarks electronically would be thus guaranteed, and they could avoid the risk of evening exhaustion on Hitchcock's part. In addition, they knew he had to be kept away from strong drink if he were to get through the evening at all. In fact, they were not entirely successful in that regard. In spite of their vigilance, a bellboy delivered a basket of champagne to his suite, and over the objections of studio executives who guarded him all day, he ordered the gift package brought in and opened. Almost done. The diner's first glimpse of Alfred Hitchcock that evening was aptly on screen, an image of Hitchcock as he had been a quarter century earlier. Those in the ballroom of the Beverly Hilton and those who watched on national television 5 nights later saw at the outset a calm, middle-aged gentleman, alert, detached, just a bit stocky. His words, recited in his measured, almost emotionless monotone, were excerpted from an old black and white film clip from his TV show. But they were perfectly suited to the occasion that March 7th. And here's what he said. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to darkest Hollywood. Night brings a stillness to the jungle. It is so quiet you can hear a name drop. The The savage beasts have already begun gathering at the water holes to quench their thirst. Now one should be especially alert. The vicious table hopper is on the prowl, and the spotted backbiter may lurk behind a potted palm. Start to get some laughs there, right?
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah, fun, right? So he shows up on the screen. He's probably he's had a bit of champagne. Alma is there, and in 1979 at this event, he's honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award, only the 7th they had given at the time. And in his acceptance speech, he credited his wife Alma as the person who had the most significant impact on his career. Here's what he said. There's a wit to the end here. I ask permission to mention by name only 4 people who have given me the most affection, appreciation, encouragement, and constant collaboration. The first of the 4 is a film editor. The second is a scriptwriter. The third is the mother of my daughter, Pat. And the fourth is as fine a cook as ever performed miracles in a domestic kitchen. And their names are Alma Reville. Okay.
That's very sweet.
Very sweet and sincere. So, and we're almost done.
And so did she keep her maiden name?
It was Alma Reville Hitchcock.
Okay. That's,
Yeah, modern woman.
All right. For sure.
Yep. So we're at the end. In later years, when his health began to decline, Alma took on a greater role in managing his affairs. She oversized medical care, handled his correspondence, and continued to support him in his work. And I've got a bit here about the very end. One moment. It's so crazy. That dinner, I think you could make a very interesting case that like that dinner was like the end of old Hollywood. Like that, you could see that as like saying goodbye. Because at that point, Spielberg and Lucas and that lot and Coppola, they had taken over. Right.
That's
and this
a good
is kind
point.
of this old, glamorous. Yeah. And now TV too, you're starting to get...
Same year Apocalypse Now came out, right? So it's
It's like we're saying goodbye to old Hollywood. Okay, so here's and I've got a few pages here, but just to, indulge me here. Finally, it was too burdensome even for Hitchcock to maintain the charade that there was work or that there could ever again be a film. Ironically, a colleague's death gave him the moment he needed. On May 8th, there was news of the death of Victor Saville, who had known Hitchcock since 1923, when Bacon Saville and John Friedman formed a production company and engaged Hitchcock as a crew member. Saville had come to the American Film Institute dinner just a few weeks earlier, and he had appeared so well. Peggy Robertson arrived at the office early the next morning to tell Hitchcock gently before he heard it from the media or a telephone call. She told him that regretfully, there was sad news, and then without any expression, Hitchcock said he had sad news to report too. He was closing the office. Today, she was no longer needed. With a mixture of relief and confusion and anxiety for him, for herself, and for everyone else in the office, she made her way to the executives at Universal, only to be told that her severance indeed was effective at once, and that and this is pretty dark, contrary to what Hitchcock had insisted over the years, he had made no provision for her after almost 25 years of employment. You know who did a good job with that? And we're going to we already did cover him. But Bowie took care of his his lifetime assistant. He left her with
he gave her like $2 million.
Couple million. Yeah, like enough to be okay. Yeah. So another not so good moment for Hitchcock here. The end was to be quick and complete. The office would be shut down within days. Suzanne Gautier stayed on a short while to help pack personal effects for removal to Bellagio Road, and then she was gone too. And like Robertson, Hitchcock's personal secretary was left without provision for employment or means of sustenance. "Leave me alone," he told her the last day. I, a sea of alone. All right. And then here's Hitchcock reflecting. At times over the next months, he rejected the suggestion that he allow a priest, a friend of the O'Connell family, to come for a visit or to celebrate a quiet, informal ritual at the house for his comfort. It had been years since he had attended worship. He had done so only when cousins visited from England, but it was not so long since he had expressed his distrust and fear of the clergy. "I was born a Catholic," he had said a few years earlier to a boy who interviewed him during a long-distance telephone call from St. Ignatius, their shared alma mater. I went to a Catholic school, and now I have a conscience with lots of trials over beliefs. But for all his love of structure, Hitchcock could find no path to confront the trials, nor means to work out the struggle in doubt and faith, and so to bring peace to his troubled spirit. Don't let any priests on the lot. He he uh, he had whispered to his office staff in the last years. They're all after me. They all hate me. There was no way of convincing him to see a clergyman at home either, although he imagined their presences there too. There were so many resentments locked up inside him, Samuel Taylor said. He never really had any close friends. Suzanne and I knew him as well as anyone, but even here there was a rift, as there was with everyone who ever tried to befriend him. And yet it must have been very hard for him. Hitch was taken very seriously by the whole world, but not by Hollywood until it was too late. He was a great artist, but people in Hollywood never accepted him as such because of the content of his films. They thought he just told a good yarn. Hollywood believed the art of film lay in the content. Therefore, they refused to believe that a man who told what they considered frivolous stories could be a great artist. But after all, one could condemn Chaucer and Shakespeare on the grounds of what appears to be frivolous content. Hollywood never knew what a great artist was. Under the proper circumstances, Hitch should have been nominated for every Directors Guild Award and every Oscar. The basic hypocrisy of Hollywood is that they don't really believe film is an art. Hitch knew all this. It was all inside him. He and Alma knew it. How painful it must have been for them to be where they were and not be fully appreciated, especially after they had left England for that reason, expecting America to provide what London hadn't. But Hollywood just made him their house clown.
Mm.
It is really interesting that his legacy has been reassessed. And
it only just that only just dawned on me now that I mean it's still the same. The kind of films that he made, horrors, suspense, thrillers, they're not the ones that are immediately celebrated by the Academy or like the Golden Globes or whoever it is, because we like drama,
right.
Mainly just drama, sometimes comedy, like a little bit of romance, like historical films, that type of thing is sort of seen as the high art or the high storytelling. And I guess that had just never occurred to me that in his time he wouldn't have been as celebrated, because we see him as this like great filmmaker that like a filmmaker's filmmaker that everyone sort of reveres. But yeah, no, that makes now when it's put into context, that makes so much sense. Like, yeah, he would have lost out to any like big drama that was happening at the time.
Yeah,
because the thrillers are low art.
Right.
Let me just say too, though, wherever you are in life, don't go looking to America, and especially don't go looking to Hollywood to validate you.
Yeah.
Because they will run you into the ground, like on purpose. You can be a Shakespeare level genius, which Hitchcock was for cinema, and they'll still backbite and backstab and talk shit about you, and they will not give you your full due.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah. And then as soon as you make a movie that like slightly doesn't make sense to them, it's like, oh, he's fallen off.
He's a hack.
Completely over. Right.
He's overrated.
Yeah. Maybe you just didn't get it. Do you think that? Could you consider that? Yeah.
All right. I'm going to read us out here to the end, just a few more pages. Okay. Shortly after Hitchcock's 80th birthday on August of 1979, Ingrid Bergman paid a visit. He took both my hands, she recalled, and tears streamed down his face. And he said, "Ingrid, I'm going to die." And I said, "But of course you are going to die sometime, Hitch. We are all going to die." And then I told him that I too had recently been very ill and that I had thought about it too. And for a moment, the logic of that seemed to make him more peaceful. Just before the end of the year, the British American Chamber of Commerce, rushing to precede a bigger honor about which everyone was talking, voted Hitchcock Man of the Year. And then at Christmas time, the official announcement came. The New Year's honors list from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was published. And in the diplomatic service and overseas list, Alfred Hitchcock was named a Knight Commander of the British Empire. A trip to London was impossible, and so on January 3rd, 1980, the British Consul General came to the U.S. Camera crews were present early in the day, and with a strange aptness, the presentation of the formal papers of knighthood was held not in Hitchcock's office, which was by now completely dismantled, but on a makeshift office set, which gave the illusion of a normal workday at the office. With the cameras and lights, it could have been a cameo appearance in one of his pictures. Hitchcock seated behind an oak desk, impassive, slightly careless. He had been given generous injections of cortisone for the arthritis was causing crueler pain than ever. His pacemaker had been monitored for the previous afternoon. After the formal words of investiture, Hitchcock surprised everyone and made the men from Universal more than a little anxious by agreeing to answer reporters' questions. I'm happy that it came my way at the right time, he said with a trace of sarcasm. I suppose it shows that if you stick to something long enough, eventually somebody takes notice. Why did the Queen's recognition take so long? I suppose it was a matter of carelessness. Did he think being Sir Alfred would make any difference in his wife's attitude toward him? I certainly hope so. Perhaps she will now mind her own business and do what she's told. A luncheon followed it.
Wild it took that long
to make him a knight. It's because of the content. It's because of which we're going to talk about in the After Dark, getting into the Hays Code. The guy broke taboos and he broke the mold, and it took to the 80s for him to be kind of like, for culture to catch up, I guess. Mm-hmm. A luncheon followed, and a number of his business and professional colleagues toasted Sir Hitch. Cary Grant, another Briton who had relocated, brought great cheer to the somewhat disconcerting afternoon. Janet Leigh was there, and the usual array of MCA Universal executives, and Hitchcock's daughter and his agent. Without knowing it was to be a final goodbye, I spoke to Hitchcock at the luncheon that day, Ernest Lehman recalled, but none of the sadness of his last year can obliterate my memories of all the good times, the exciting times, the creative victories we had shared in the past. On March 16th, Alfred Hitchcock made a last brief public appearance. It was the custom for the American Film Institute award winner to introduce the next year's recipient, and so he was driven back to the Beverly Hilton for a laborious but brief taping session. The producers saw to it that, unlike the afternoon taping of his acceptance speech a year earlier, he was now wearing his upper and lower bridges, and that the cue cards were large enough and close enough for him to read without difficulty. He introduced the program in James Stewart's honor, but could not attend the dinner that evening. All right, so let's see here. I'm going to finish this out, actually. The weeks after were quiet and uninterrupted, except for the more frequent attendance of doctors and nurses at Bellagio Road. Lawyers and agents appeared more often too, for there were details of the vast Hitchcock estate that required his signature. A signature added to a codicil on March 25th that had become all but indistinguishable by now, completely changed from the firm, legible schoolboy's hand of years and years. As Hitchcock turned the many pages of his last will and testament, he could, had he been alert and capable of reflection, have read a summary statement of all the worldly results of his artistic achievements. In an estate conservatively estimated in excess of $20 million, which is still a lot of money now, and we're talking about $100 million worth of money or more. There were major holdings in city and country bonds issued by LA and San Francisco, plus ownership of oil wells in 4 states and gas wells in Canada. That's the real money. That's you got that energy stock, your own wells and stuff. There were almost 150,000 shares of MCA stock and 2,250 head of cattle at the Hitchcock Hereford Farms, of which he was a disinterested absentee landlord. There were major percentages of the incomes of 18 of his films, and there were 66 cases of wine and 29 major artworks, oil paintings by Rouault, Avery, Sickert, Dubuffet and Dufy, Vlaminck, and I don't know these names, and Ultra. Anyway, works by Epstein, Klee, Dali, Rawlinson, and Rodin. Art of Darkness. Through a complicated series of trusts, Hitchcock's estate was willed to his wife, daughter, and granddaughters. Had his sister survived him, she was to receive a sum not to exceed $28,000 and $25 a week for 5 years after his death. Provided, however, that such payments shall be made only so long as, and to the extent that my estate shall be able to make such payments without unreasonably depriving my wife and daughter. That provision would have been unlikely to take effect in any case. The taxes paid on the estate in 1980 alone were over $1 million. But there was a marked omission of charitable bequests, and saddest of all, and contrary to repeated promises made to his most devoted employees over the years, there was no provision for anyone outside the family, except for 3 former servants. It was a bulky, complicated, and not entirely edifying document the lawyers took away with them in March. Gradually, the great final battle subsided. Arthritis had racked his body, but in early April, the pain oddly diminished. He slept more and deeply, but then his liver failed. His kidney function slowed, and his tired, enlarged heart no longer responded to the modern device he had at first worn so proudly. On the night of April 28th into the 29th, the doctor was called, and by early morning, the family had gathered quietly. "I retire when I die," Hitchcock had said not long before. One never knows the ending. One has to die to know exactly what happens after death, although Catholics have their hopes. And he died on 1970, long episode. He died at 9:17 in the morning on April 29th of 1980. No suspense, no violence, no birds pecking out your eyes. The terror, after all, had been met for years in his dreams and in his art. It was, as so often, a quiet, scarcely discernible moment, as if he had glimpsed the cloudless horizon that was always his image of serenity, as if his earlier, almost forgotten hopes had finally come back to gather round and had not, at the last, left him alone in the darkness. And that's the life and death of Alfred Hitchcock.
All right. All right. Quite a story. It really is when you take a minute to pause on kind of reflect on his contribution. It is pretty amazing. And I realize now there's a bunch of movies of his I haven't seen that I need to see.
It's really incredible. I mean, it's just like the whole of cinema history, like up until his death, he was like, his life paralleled it. And it like straddles old Hollywood into new Hollywood, and then the reassessment after his death and the recognition that we have like a genius of the highest order on our hands, and like an honorary American, always an Englishman, but like as American as either you or I, Brad, in a sense, like big part of the landscape. A technical genius, a genius of storytelling, an inspiration to this day to filmmakers. What do you think, Abby? What were your final thoughts on Hitchcock before we take a break?
And in his lifetime, it was motion pictures began, and sound, and color, and TV. It all happened during his lifetime and career. It would be constant technological developments.
And his name was indistinguishable from horror. We didn't even talk about Alfred, like psychological thrillers and horror. He was the master of suspense in his lifetime. I mean, and we didn't even talk about Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which was in the 50s, and sort of his involvement in television and that medium. But okay, let's take a little break. But first I'm going to sort of bring us back all the way in and tease what we're going to talk about on the Patreon. I gotta ask Brad a final question too. But so Alfred Hitchcock died on the 29th of April, 1980, at the age of 80. The three of us, we weren't born. We were not on the scene yet. So he died just before.
Yeah, not quite.
Kind of. We got here, and he influenced everybody. I don't think there's probably not a filmmaker alive who isn't influenced directly or indirectly by Hitchcock. And then Alma passed away in 1982, 2 years after Hitch. So on the After Dark for patrons, if you can't get enough of us, if you're not sick of us yet, we're going to do a little mini biography of Robert Bloch, the author of Psycho. We're going to talk a little more about Hitchcock's final days. We're going to talk about the weird gift that Hitchcock gave Melanie Griffith, which is quite funny. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Hitchcock Blonde. And then we're going to talk finally about the Vertigo restoration. And I'm going to give that one to Abby. if you don't mind, Abbie, talking about
Okay.
that. Cool. And Brad, I got to ask you the closing question. What do you think Hitchcock would be doing today?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that if his energy and health had maintained, he would have continued making films. It would be interesting to see what I got thinking. It would be interesting, in his day, you didn't really make long-running continuous television series. So I do wonder what he would do with like a season of a TV show, right? Like
Yeah.
12 episodes or
Alfred
something.
Hitchcock presents True Detective.
Something like that. That would
or
be
maybe we would get a third season of Mindhunter finally.
yeah, there you go. That would be incredible. That'd be perfect. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
dude.
I can't believe they didn't. I can't believe they're not making that.
Give us a third season of Mindhunter as if Alfred Hitchcock directed it. How about that?
Right. Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I would like to see. I don't think. I mean, he would probably keep up with the technical developments. I would be curious to see like what his response was to like special effects and CGI. Would he be like, no, it's got to be, it's got to be real, or would he embrace it? I'm not sure, really, right? So that would be interesting. But yeah, I want to see the third season of Mindhunter directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. I think I'm going to call this episode Alfred Hitchcock Blonde on Blonde, I think.
Okay.
Very fun. Abbie, give your plugs for people who don't know you or just getting to know you. Tell people where they can find you. What are you working on? What do you got going on?
Okay, my name is Abbie Lucas. You can find me on Instagram at Abbie Lucas, ABBIELUCAS, or on my website, abbielucas.com. I'm a filmmaker based in London. I just finished a short film that I shot in America, actually, because, apparently we make films in Britain and then go to America. And that one's coming up to film festivals, but in the meantime, you can catch my film Voices on the Arma channel on YouTube. And in the pipeline, I have my first feature coming up with the writer who wrote Voices, whose name is Omar Khan. So, yeah, lots of things in the pipeline.
Awesome.
Go and listen to our AI psychological horror thriller about a man who's falsely imprisoned in 2 parts that Abbie and I co-authored called Basilisk. Look up Basilisk Dark Pony Radio on Spotify. You can't miss it. We write together.
Do with AI.
Right. I'd love to see the Hitchcock AI thriller. But anyway, all we can do is take inspiration from him and sort of try to leave the nastier bits in the past and enjoy one of his films or all of his films. Brad, which one are you going to watch? You got to go watch The Birds, right?
Well, I might have to watch The Birds, but yeah, I'm gonna have to go back through here and really, really kind of think about it, because I've seen all of the headline ones plus a few others. So yeah, it's yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out. My wife loves Hitchcock movies too, so that'll be something good we can watch together. Yeah.
Hitchcock really gets the people going. People love Hitch. All right, we'll be back on the After Dark. Please support the podcast at Patreon or Substack. You know where to find it. Abbie, thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.